I was taking a wander out on the far end of our 6-acre spot here, and I realized, oh, people have been asking for a little while for updates on how our western wall has evolved. Very, very short story. I'll link here to more detail on this, but basically there was a hedgerow on the other side of the property line, on the other side of all this growth, that was protecting us a little bit from some spray drift from a conventional orchard, and that was removed by the landowner. And so Juan and I and some other folks helping out have worked on adding in a lot of vegetative solutions to help defend ourselves on this side of the landscape, and it's growing pretty nicely. I'd love to do an update on how things are unfolding out here. And I think it's a worthwhile reminder at the outset to keep in mind that these are solutions that cost next to no money if you're propagating plants. Of course, you can buy things in to get things going, but plants as solutions to challenges, to people problems, or to chemical blocking and things like that, if you have some time with it, or you've got some plant material already and you develop the skills with it, you can leverage those plants to really create some serious and ever increasingly potent ways to mitigate things that you don't necessarily want coming into your landscape. I think a sweet example are these miscanthus, which were planted last spring. These went in as tiny little rootlets, which is something we offer on the website, but this gives you a sense, you know, they're not super thick within the first year. I could have planted clumps out here, but we stretched the plant material and made this nice arched kind of like walkway that's flanked by miscanthus. So another year or two and these should be able to really do some serious work. Right now they're adding a little bit to the visual barrier, but you know, 20%, 30%. But that's the beauty of miscanthus. First year they come up as like one stalk, then the next year maybe there's 5 or 6, and then each of those multiplied by 5. So we'll be up to a very thick wall here. You can see they're a little bit limited by the shade that they're experiencing here. If this was full sun, they'd be a little bit taller, but 6 to 8 feet, if that's what they get to, is actually useful to us for the goal of slowing down wind and making a visual barrier. Mixed in here is a sea berry. So these are wild female sea berries that we dug up from a thicket. These are particularly spiky, particularly hardy, really late bearing, and you can see it's got some fruit on there. So whether we harvest this fruit or leave it for the birds, that's up to time and energy later on. But sea berry as a nitrogen fixing, suckering, sun appreciating, rough soil tolerant ally within this design feels really useful. We've got a nice male right there and some cultivar females a little further in, a little further from receiving the front edge of any spray drift that might come in. And so that we can definitely harvest, and then the wild female sea berries can be here to do their ecological function of thicket forming to the exact right height that we need, 8 feet to 12 feet or so, suckering and filling out and adding nitrogen to the system. The living wall here on the boundary just in from the property line has been doing pretty well this last year, so I use pruners somewhat frequently, every couple of weeks or so, to prune stuff that's leaning in this way to kind of shape this wall that on the other side can drop off and be really full. This is the area that was most raw after the removal of the brush. This has been where we've been adding most of the new plant material. The other one we're sculpting away stuff that's already in the hedgerow, and this one we're adding in. What's interesting is I think we've hit a threshold where it's thick enough and wild enough in here, so from the miscanthus to the brush wall, that deer don't really push through very much. And so the sunchokes that we added, the hazelnuts that we put in, the miscanthus that I mentioned, all of those, because it's thick enough now, they all get to grow up together. So this will get quite a bit thicker a lot faster. And I think what happens is, since this is a mowed walkway through here, I take a riding mower or a push mower and maintain this, the deer sense this and they kind of stay on this pathway and hopefully leave if they are in this landscape. But then it gets to be a miscanthus to miscanthus little corridor of crazy thickness. We'll just let everything happen in here. We leaned really hard into the nitrogen fixers as support staff for this to happen. Normally, plants like autumn olive can show up in a disturbed site and do their work. And so we're working with some cultivar autumn olives here that are growing beautifully. We'll start getting some crops soon, and then we can start using the branches. We'll cut the branches that are loaded with fruit to harvest them, pick the fruit off, and then use the vegetation to support the next layer of succession. Like, for example, this Siberian peach. But right now this peach is getting all this excess nitrogen from both the autumn olive and the gummies that are in here, as well as river locust or Amorpha fruticosa, both fixing nitrogen, doing a really good job at being here early, and then can be cut back to feed the Siberian peach or the native plum that's growing in here. So this plum is kind of like swamped by river locust, but that protects it right now, and they can grow for a bit. Even this rose is actually helpful right now. It's adding more visual barrier, more blockage, and can be cut and fed to the next layer of succession when they start feeling like they need it. In fact, by a long shot, the two classes of plants that are doing the best in this disturbed early succession pattern are the grasses. So the miscanthus, if we had done things like switchgrass underneath or other varieties of miscanthus, I bet they all could have done really nicely in here. And the nitrogen fixing shrubs, so the seaberry, the autumn olive, the gumi, the river locust, are definitely the strongest characters in here. And interestingly are getting the least amount of browse from the deer. It feels like somehow the really early successional stuff is less interesting to them than things like hazelnuts and chestnuts and apples in later succession. So early disturbance needing lots of growth and lots of competency to establish nitrogen fixers in grasses, and then as things stabilize and get better, the later succession elements can be added in. I'm learning as I go. There's some areas in here where we're co-designing. So we've added in the sunchokes, we've added in the miscanthus, maybe a couple nitrogen fixers here or there, but for the most part it's like, okay, there's European buckthorn, there's multiflora rose, there's Japanese honeysuckle. They're all tough characters, but they're really appropriate for the work at hand, which is absolute most vegetation, most visual barrier, most windbreak, most catch of anything that might drift this way. We'll add in characters, but what I definitely don't want to do is erase every single other being and then have the entire burden of design just on us to add in. So all of these characters here are working together to do the work and help protect this landscape. And then the creatures, the little beings, like here's another male seaberry we've added. That'll need a light release soon, and certainly the privet and the rose that are all around them can be chopped and fed to this, and this will be the shrub layer we want here. But I don't know, this is a very thick part of the wall, and at this point we're looking at about 80% of it just beings that are here that we're managing, and then 20% are yes ends where we've added in things like a little gumi friend or an oak tree or the black locust here. I'm realizing I need to switch gears into black currant harvest while it's not too hot, but I'll leave it here for now. The brush wall is the living wall. The wild elements are holding on and growing nicely, which is lovely to see, and they have been compatible with adding in early successional plants like the sea buckthorn, like the autumn olive, the gumi, the river locust. The grasses are doing really well, and then the later succession plants are getting nibbled by deer, but we can add rings as we need to protect them. But it's a good reminder, in early successional, early disturbance regimes, your early successional characters are going to do the best right out of the gate, and the design should be, I think, very weighted towards early succession characters in a context like this. It's raw, it's open, it's freshly cut, and needing something very fast. Those are the characters to really set in motion and then add in the slow other characters later on. But all in all, it's been growing really well. We had an abundant rain spring, and that helped immensely. And now we're getting good heat in the summer, and the plants are growing. Let me know what sort of questions you have around establishing living wall systems to deflect and protect and add privacy between yourself and neighbors that are upwind and up watershed that you might want to deflect from. Thanks for watching.